first of all, and thank you for joining us in what I hope will be one of many Let's Talk Infrastructure. This is a new series that we're starting here at NARC just to add another opportunity for members to collaborate and network. Sorry, just admitting people. And just, find out what everyone's doing across the country. So thank you to Misty, Lonnie, and Miriam for being kind of the guinea pigs here in starting this off. We want this to be mostly a discussion-based meeting, so feel free to jump in and join once we're finished with the very short and brief presentations. So please don't be shy. If you do have comments or questions, please use the chat function, but also hold them until after the presentations are done. Let's see. So today we have Lonnie Hunt from the Deep East Texas Council of Governments. Raise your hand. Miriam Gillow-Wiles, sorry, from Southwest Colorado Council of Governments, and Misty from the Buckeye Hills Regional Council in Southeast Ohio. I guess we'll just jump in and start. They're going to tell you, where they're from and what they're doing in their region as far as broadband. Maybe Miriam, would you like to kick things off?
Sure, I can do that. I was just going to show a map of where we're at, so that way the folks who don't quite know where Southwest Colorado is have a little bit of understanding of just where we're at and some of the challenges we face. So thanks for the introduction, Jess. I'm the executive director over here, and we've been working on broadband for almost 11 years now. We got a grant in 2010 for $2 million from the state of Colorado to do intra-community network, so fiber both aerially and buried, to connect our community anchor institutions. Let me show you where we're at so you have an idea of maybe where we are. So can you guys see our nice little map there?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the Southwest Colorado area, these 5 counties. You can see the topography that we might have. Both, we have valleys, massive mountains, like 14,000 foot mountains, all up in this area. And then over here we have farmland and canyons. And there's 10 municipalities, the 2 Indian tribes, and the 5 counties in 6,500 square miles. It's also, we think there's 15 people per square mile on average, but 2 of the counties have 2 people or less per square mile on average. And we have I think we're close to 70% federally owned lands as well. So makes it super easy to build broadband. That's the answer. And just for location check, so this is Southwest Colorado. This is Denver up here. It's a 6.5-hour drive. Albuquerque is our closest city, and that's 3.5 hours away, our closest large city with an international airport. Phoenix and Salt Lake are also 7 hours away. So here we go. I'm gonna stop sharing, but now you guys have an idea of where we're at and why broadband's important, because we're almost in the middle of nowhere. Not quite literally, but really, really close on the edge of it. So that's one of the reasons we started on broadband, because we've been so disconnected, both geographically and technology-wise from the rest of the state. So we got this funding. It was matched with about $1.5 million of local money across the 5 counties. And it connected the community anchor institutions, so our libraries, our schools, our fire departments, police departments, town and city halls, water stations, water tanks, wastewater, that kind of fun stuff. So that way at least the municipalities and the counties could control their own assets, because before that, a lot of times if something was wrong at, like, say, a wastewater treatment plant, there was no way to control those. Somebody had to drive down there and see what was going on. And this was 2010. So this lasted a little over 3.5 years. We finished it up in early 2014. And that's great. Now we have fiber optics to the community anchor institutions, but we don't have fiber between the communities in a lot of cases. And we were not allowed to do any public-private partnerships because of state law that prohibited, that was so strict that if we were to take a decent interpretation of it, you couldn't provide Wi-Fi at the library because that would be giving it away, and we weren't allowed to give it away. So that's the sort of lay of the land where we started. Over the last 7 years, as I've been here, we've done a big push for education for our local, state, and federal elected officials and appointed officials to get them to understand not just that, yeah, we understand the internet's important, but you have internet, right? What we all now understand and know firsthand because of the pandemic. We've been trying to build that information up for the last 7 years, understanding. And then also, especially with our state legislation, at the state level, our ISPs tend to control the broadband and technology agendas. So because it's kind of complicated and confusing, and so it's a lot easier for elected officials to just be like, yeah, okay, cool, we need some laws. So getting them some better education about how those actually impact us has made for a much more positive engagement and a better understanding with our state elected officials to be able to have counter arguments as to why an ISP might be asking for a lot of money with very little strings attached, or to disallow a local government to do something. So that has created a lot of understanding and a lot of goodwill. And so we get calls from our elected officials about certain pieces of legislation. We have a group of folks, myself included, in the state that work together on this to then help craft legislation that is broadband friendly, or like local government broadband friendly. So we can actually solve problems and not create more problems. So that piece of legislation was passed and that prohibited us from doing anything broadband related with public-private partnerships in 2005. And it actually designated broadband in the kilobytes per second speeds. So that's like a fax machine, or like 1995. and that was in 2005. And so we've been trying to fix the speeds in our state legislation ever since, because they're so low that basically anything counts as broadband. We managed to, that piece of legislation had an opt-out clause. So in Colorado, if you have a majority of the voters opt out of that, then that piece of legislation disappears, and the municipality, the county, or I should say the local government, can then enter into a broadband contract with a private provider, be their own ISP, do whatever they want with it. So as part of that education, what we did was help create the education around why we needed to opt out as the communities and the counties. So that way they can then set their own destiny when it comes to telecommunications. We had, and that was 2015, 2016, we had the lowest rate that was passed was 75% at a local government, which is a pretty high rate of anything passing ever, anywhere, especially in local governments. And the highest one was at 91%, almost 92%. So we've taken the lead in the region and then also at the state level for all the cogs in our state on telecommunications, because it's been so needed to be able to have that, the upward engagement and the local engagement. So it's sort of end to end. So we have a more educated and continuous knowledge base as it sort of grows outward. And that has really helped a lot with our broadband development. We're currently in the process of working with a large private provider to get some very much needed middle mile infrastructure in the region. We have applied for EDA funding. We're looking at USDA funding, and we've applied for FCC funding as well, but that is a much harder nut to crack. It's kind of a messy process with the USAC funding. So that's what we've been doing. It's been a lot of policy level work coupled with trying to get funding to do the actual installation. Well, to do the engineering, the planning and engineering, and then the installation, you got to change the policy sometimes to be able to do both of those. So it's kind of a how your house is built system. And then some of that federal issues are the FCC, everybody's favorite acronym right now, at least in this conversation. There's a lot of things at the FCC that make this a lot harder than it needs to be. It's already hard. Like building regional and rural broadband is already hard, and the FCC's rulemaking and challenges make it harder than it needs to be. So the biggest challenge at the FCC is their mapping. They use what's called a Form 477, and that's a form that all the ISPs have to fill out. And that's just saying where they're certifying who has what speeds where. There's never any checks on that from the FCC. So if an ISP says you've got 25 by 3, which is the definition of broadband, at a location out in the middle of nowhere at a farm, then they have that speed. Well, yes, they do. Well, in reality, things are very different because those speeds, who's considered served at that broadband speed is based on census block data. So if a house in the census block has that data, the entire census block is considered served. While that one house might be right next to the pedestal that actually gets decent broadband, but the rest of the houses in the census block are nowhere near it, so they don't get hardly any speeds. There's almost no way to counter that with the FCC, so that's another challenge. And most of the federal funds are based on those maps. So areas that say they're served, it's hard to get USDA funding to solve those areas because they're already served. So that leads us to the funding issues at the FCC. The FCC gives away $1.5 billion. I want to say it was Senator Bennett's office said something that the amount of money we have given away in subsidies, we could have already built a fiber to the premise in every house in this country. So the FCC gives away a lot of money to the private companies to build our telecommunications network, which is great. If they would build our telecommunications network in the areas that are low population or lower income population, or just even just challenging to build, like, I don't know, mountains and canyons and rivers and lakes and pine trees. So all of that makes it really hard to solve what's the need on the ground, especially the need that we have right now, that we've had for a very long time, but has just become so much more acute in the last 9 months. So there you go. I'm happy to answer more questions and to talk about any of those issues.
Great, thank you so much. Lonnie, Misty, whoever wants to go next, I'll leave it up to you.
I'll let Misty go next.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Leslie and Jessica, for inviting me to speak during this first session. So Buckeye Hills Regional Council, we're an 8-county region in rural Appalachian, Ohio, right on the border of West Virginia, right on the Ohio River. It's beautiful. My region covers 8 counties. We're about 2 hours from Columbus, 3.5 hours from Cincinnati, 2.5, 3 hours from Cleveland. So in the southeast corner, right there across from Parkersburg, West Virginia. And we have about 260,000 folks in our region. So we have hilly terrain, we have foliage cover, we have all of those things that that was just talked about. And I don't want to go back through the FCC and all of those things. I mean, I want to provide you today with some information that's hopefully not duplicative of what we just talked about, but really our efforts to focus the attention on the lack of access to broadband throughout our region, and really how we're working now to incorporate those urban access issues into a statewide message about broadband. In 2000, so we have not been working on this since 2004 or 5 or whatever, 8. We were awarded a grant in 2019 from the Federal Appalachian Regional Commission through their power program, which was a program that was designed to assist coal impacted communities to recover from the downturn in the industry. And we were awarded that grant for a US 33 broadband corridor study. And so really what started out as a transportation project turned into an 8-county region-wide broadband infrastructure access study. And we made the case for those funding. I mean, it really was talking about broadband, but broadband along that corridor and the lack thereof. We basically said, you know, any economic recovery is hampered without inadequate access and adoption of broadband internet technology. So we reactivated our broadband committee that we had at Buckeye Hills, and our intent was really to study that corridor, which doesn't run through our entire region, only a few counties, but we wanted to identify assets and services and other key materials that would contribute to the designation of that corridor as a new high-tech corridor to attract jobs and investment to communities and areas that were along that corridor, really as the first step to a larger broadband strategy for the region. Really, as you know, the Federal Communication Commission relies on those private providers of internet service to report what areas they cover. And those reports typically exaggerate that coverage. And our study really started with a review of the FCC maps of where they were saying coverage was and wasn't. We also had some information on middle mile assets that ran throughout our region because we had been supportive and a partner on a stimulus project that funded middle mile through 34 counties in Appalachia, Ohio. But when we began studying that corridor and looking at those FCC maps, we quickly realized that there was a huge overstatement, and we really couldn't do anything on our end unless we could tell the story of that exaggeration in real numbers. And what we found was that in the areas where the FCC coverage map showed most of the households having access, by overlaying that FCC Form 477 data with the hub data, which is the actual address point deployment level addressing data, in reality, 80 to 90% of those areas that the FCC map showed had coverage did not have coverage. And we've done significant work on that. We received an additional influx of private funding that allowed us to extrapolate that data and expand that data and do that analysis on a 37-county region throughout Appalachian, Ohio, and a few adjoining counties. The accuracy of those maps mattered because the FCC uses them to determine eligibility for federal subsidies for broadband deployment. So, if a carrier inaccurately claims they're serving an area, the FCC might reject that area for a subsidy, which leaves those people who live there stuck with inadequate or no service, when in reality they didn't have service to begin with, and there's no opportunity for others to come serve them. We really successfully challenged a filing by a broadband service provider in our region and really throughout the state that challenged the census tracts that were eligible in the RDOF. And we used our data to submit to FCC a kind of rebuttal and a challenge to their challenge. And the FCC upheld that and put those census blocks back in to the auction for consideration. So we are hopeful that, we at least have more area in our region that was able to be bid on. And, that was, if we wouldn't have been doing our research, we wouldn't have been able to do that messaging and advocacy. Our research findings and the principles that really define all of the messages that we are trying to send to the state and federal government moving forward are, number one, the high cost of building last mile broadband to areas of low population density deters private investment, and there's not now, nor will there ever be, a business case to provide service in our most rural areas. And we have defined a rural expanse of those areas that are 20 households per square mile and less. And that is a significant portion of our region. So if we are waiting for it to ever be profitable and a business case for private business to expand. We are going to be waiting for a long time, and we have been waiting for a long time. And then number two, every household and business deserves reliable high-speed internet access. And without sustained public sector capital investment and public-private partnerships, it's not going to happen. And to that end, we have developed policy positions. Our member local governments are passing resolutions in support of those same positions. The state of Ohio they now have a broadband office, which they have not had prior to, I think, March of this year. Right before the pandemic was the first director of Broadband Ohio was appointed. And he is doing a great job, of course, but he is a one-man show, and started, I really think, literally the week before the pandemic and we all went home. So it's been a struggle on his end. We do have House Bill 13 that's up for approval at the Ohio House, and the House, I think, has passed it, and now it's up in the General Assembly. But House Bill 13 is really a carrier-driven bill that it's $20 million, and we know, at least in our rural Appalachian region, in an 8-county region, we need a $363 million subsidy to provide fiber to the home. So 20 million is a great start, and it's a carrier-driven bill. Those dollars will go directly to carriers to meet the delta that they indicate they will have. There is some teeth into that, which is not in the FCC funding, that requires carriers to submit individual addresses to get the subsidy or get the funding from the state. So that's good. One update that I will share with you that just is hot off the press today, the Ohio Association of Regional Councils created a broadband working group that was made up of rural and urban members that indicated an interest in having more conversations about this issue. And we've been working to weave the urban and rural broadband issues and messages together so we can encourage the state collectively to move forward to address the accessibility issues being faced throughout the entire state, not just in rural Appalachian Ohio. So the problem is one of both availability, which is what my region faces, which is the inadequacy or the absence of broadband infrastructure at all, and affordability, which is the inability of low-income households to pay for the service. So our overarching message to state officials, which the Ohio Association of Regional Councils approved today, is that closing the digital divide in Ohio requires a meaningful financial resources and collaboration among all levels of government, working in partnership with providers and communities. And to truly solve the problem, Ohio needs an ongoing dedicated budget line item for broadband. And we're recommending to the state a truly unique, regionally driven approach that can effectively leverage and administer an expanded and critically needed statewide effort. So this effort would put regional councils working together with the state broadband office on the same page to provide planning services, manage financial resources at the local level for our member communities, really be the boots on the ground technical assistance for the state of Ohio and for our communities. We also are proposing a line item in the state budget for deployment dollars, so capital dollars, but not just to go directly to carriers, but to be designed to applicants from all levels of government, nonprofits, ISPs, electric, rural electric cooperatives. Any organization could apply for those funds that could apply for also federal funding. So USDA, Reconnect program, ARC matching funds, those kinds of things. And we feel that regional councils in the lead of that, bringing our strong community relationships, our administrative capacity, and our experience administering federal and state funding is the ideal fit for the state of Ohio. Many of us are already heavily involved in broadband access initiatives in our regions, and our natural role as conveners and resource conduits and technical experts lends itself seamlessly to regional broadband deployment management, and that's in my very humble opinion. So I'm excited to say that OARC, the executive directors met today, and we've agreed to move forward together with this one voice at the state level. So now our efforts are going to begin around messaging and also bringing others to the table that will support that same message. So thanks again for inviting me. I have so much more information, but I'd be trying to be concise. So
Thank you. There was one question from Pauline that I just wanted to go over really quick before we move on to Lonnie. It was about how you were able to obtain address level data when you were doing the study.
So those are published. It's called Hub Data, HUUB data. And I don't know if I have a link to that, but I could look for that while we're talking. But you can go on and you can pull down that data. You have to marry that in your GIS and all those things, which I'm assuming most of you have that capability. Our broadband consultant, I'm remiss in not mentioning that. We have a broadband consultant that we brought on board and requested proposals and secured him with our ARC funding. And we've been able to keep that consulting relationship going with other private funds, but he's really leading on determining what level of data and gathering that for us. But I probably have a link I can find and put it in the chat.
Great, thank you so much.
Also, I was remiss in not saying we also have a consultant that we've been using since 2015, and it's useful to have the same consultant because they have the continuity of knowledge and education of regions. There's a company out of Minnesota called GeoPartners that has all the wireless data across the country, so they can look at a wireless overlay because wireless ISPs are also part of this, and is the cellular data, and they can look at the view sheds as well to get some of that better data of what's really actually happening. We've utilized them too.
Great, thank you so much, guys. Lonnie, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, and Jessica, I hope you don't shoot me. I had told Jessica I was not going to use a PowerPoint, but I really feel like, and I think I can do this quickly, and I think it'll be helpful. It'll help me stay on message, and maybe the visuals will help everybody else. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start this thing. Okay. We are deep East Texas. We're a rural region. We're north of the Houston area. We border the Louisiana state line. We are a totally rural region. We're larger than 6 states. We're bigger than Vermont and New Hampshire and 4 other states in terms of geography. We have about 385,000 residents in our region. So we're very rural and generally sparsely populated. And if we wait for someone else to come in here and solve our broadband issues, we're always going to be waiting and waiting. We're also a historically economically distressed region with low incomes, high poverty. We just have lots of needs. We're an area that is heavily forested. We have 4 national forests in the state of Texas. They're all 4 within our region. We have the 3 largest reservoirs in the state of Texas in our region. So we're very much a rural region of agriculture, pine trees, and lakes. We have figured out the solution to this problem. All we need is money now in order to enact it. We started with guiding principles, 2 guiding principles. Number 1, we have to find a solution that includes everyone, every home and every business, no matter how remote or how rural they are, and it must be affordable. If we don't start with this, and the way we can achieve this is by leveraging the entire population of our region to make sure that everyone's included. Otherwise, we will end up perhaps making progress, and we will have pockets of areas within our region that have good broadband and still vast areas that don't. So we are just absolutely committed to the fact that we have to find a solution for the whole region, everybody, and it has to be affordable. We started about 2.5 years ago by contracting with Ericsson to do a regional feasibility study and market analysis. Some of what we got out of that were things that we already knew, but we needed confirmation of those things, and we needed a a recognized name like Ericsson to put their name on these findings to lead credence to them. We've obviously found that the majority of our residents do not have access to broadband. In our region, DSL, which as you all know is antiquated technology, is the most common internet technology available. And the other thing that we found out that really irritated us is that compared to people in suburban Dallas-Fort Worth, for the folks in Deep East Texas that have broadband, we're paying 4 times as much when you analyze the cost per megabit of service. And of course, that's not acceptable to us. The study pointed out that we have to have a multiple strategy approach, multiple technology. We have to maximize the technologies that are available. And we have to do this on a regional basis because, as has already been said, there's not enough return on investment for the private investment world to come in here and extend broadband to all our residents. We also learned from this study that the effort and the investment will be well worth it. If we can flip a switch today, which we know we can't flip a switch, this is a project that'll take a while to implement. But if we could flip that proverbial switch and light up our region with broadband, in 10 years, this is a conservative estimate from the study done by Ericsson, we will create 10,300 new jobs in a rural, economically disadvantaged region. $1.4 billion in GDP growth over those 10 years. And in addition to the economic benefit, which of course rises all ships, huge societal impact in education and healthcare. This is one of the slides out of the study that Ericsson did going up.
Lonnie, I don't want to interrupt you, but your slides actually, I can't see them.
Oh, well.
Been the best PowerPoint by Lonnie I've seen so far.
So nobody can see my slides, huh?
No.
Well, darn it. Well, then forget it.
It's been great without the slides.
It's been great.
Okay, well, I'll pull the slides
Keep going,
down.
you're
At
doing
least the
great.
slides are helping me stay on track.
You're doing great. Keep going.
I found out that from an economic impact, the transportation and warehousing sector would be the biggest beneficiary, retail, followed by information technology, professional services. From a societal impact, education and healthcare by far would benefit the most from broadband in our region. So armed with that information, we then went about looking at where we could get the money to, you got to eat this elephant one bite at a time. And we started looking at FCC, USDA. We looked really hard at the USDA Reconnect program. We learned a lot, even though we didn't apply to it, at least we haven't yet. But what we could see is we've got to have a network design. There's certain things you have to have in place before you can go apply for this federal funding. And the network design, and there's elements that, they spell out what it has to include. Bottom line is it's got to be stamped and certified by an engineer that this is a legitimate plan that will work, and here's what it's going to cost. And so we had to engage an engineering company to do that. We were able to pull together a combination of public and private money. We got an EDA grant. We got funding from a local private foundation, and we were able to issue an RFQ, and we selected Magellan Advisors to do our network design for our 12-county region. We started out with this network design probably 6 months ago with an idea in our heads about how the progression, how we would get where we need to go. We've changed course because another funding stream became available, or at least we think it's going to be available. We hope it is. And this other funding stream is CDBG based. And so it targets LMI households. And as a result, we retooled our thinking so that phase 1 of our network design is targeting the low-income households in our region. It uses those census blocks to determine, whether you qualify for LMI. And so we have designed a phase 1 project that will cost about $109 million to build. It will, out of our region of 385,000, it will allow us to provide service to 222,000 people. Of that, about 115,000 meet the HUD definition of low to moderate income, which the goal that we were shooting at, you have to reach at least 51% low to moderate income in order to gain extra points in the grant competition. So we are at the point now that we have a plan. It would cover literally about half of our region geographically. It would cover more than half the population. It will provide free access initially to 115,000 residents of our region that qualify under the LMI guidelines. And in addition to those areas that would be served initially, it gives us a framework. This is wireless service that will be 50 to 100 megabits download. We didn't want to shoot for the minimum 25.3 because already today you can make an argument that's not enough, but we know it won't be enough tomorrow. And so we wanted to shoot initially at least double what the federal standard is, with the knowledge that as technology improves and develops in the future, we'll be able to take what we're able to do and with new technology, make it even higher speed in the future. But we're also talking about 600 miles of fiber, because even though this is wireless technology, all these towers have to be fed by fiber. So we're creating redundant broadband loops around our region that give us the framework to add on and extend this service and eventually reach our dream of literally covering every home and every business in Deep East Texas. And so all we need now is a green light from the Texas General Land Office, which is administering this grant program, and we'll be off and running.
Great.
You couldn't see my slides. They're really impressive.
So I'd like to now open it up to anyone who would like to either comment or has questions. Like I said, this is meant to be discussion based, so don't be shy. If people are feeling a little shy, I do have some questions. But please.
I'm going to echo what everybody has said so far, is that you have to have this, like, just having broadband doesn't make it actually accessible. It has to be affordable. And so the operating principles we've been under is abundant, redundant, and affordable. Because if you have high-speed internet, but it's $200 a month, most people can't afford that. Does it even really exist? Type of thing.
Thomas Lanahan had a question to repeat the figures, and yes, it's the grant applications we have in. They're two different grants because they're under different competitions, but together they total $109 million, and they would allow us to serve approximately 222,000 residents scattered throughout this large, sprawling rural region of ours. And Chuck asked a question about, have you considered the importance of high-speed internet as a critical part of freight and goods movement? Mm-hmm. And I will say, Chuck, we're not there yet, but we are starting to have conversations about the need to have conversations. And as you know, the traffic artery through our region is US Highway 59, which has been designated as future Interstate 69. And so we are starting to at least talk about the need for people within our region along that US 59 I-69 corridor to come together and do some serious planning in advance so that we can hopefully guide the development and maximize the benefit of that new interstate highway, as opposed to just letting it happen, on its own. And we've had some preliminary conversations with Stephen F. Austin University, which is the only four-year university in our region, because their new president has a keen interest in economic development, and actually previously was in a university in Indiana where the northern part of I-69 has already come through. So we're not there yet, but we understand that we need to be talking about how we're going to utilize this technology to benefit our transportation industry.
We are. We are definitely taking transportation as part of our broadband infrastructure, and actually all of our plans call to build it on our roadways instead of in an aerial system, because we know that the future of our transportation is going to be predicated on broadband access. In the rural areas, 5G isn't going to happen maybe in my lifetime, just because of the amount of fiber and the density of antennas and towers needed is just too hard to do in the rural areas. It gets back to that ROI. And since our cellular providers are all private companies and it's not run by the state in this country, we're just not going to see that, because I think the antennas for 5G have to be every 800 meters apart. So it's less than a kilometer. And in the rural areas, it's like, where are you going to put that? On a cow or a deer? You know, when they move, then what? Kind of thing. So that's not going to work. And when it comes to the future of transportation, what looks like what's going to be required is a lot more data in real time, and then the cellular antennas can carry. So that data in real time is going to have to be in the roadways for that constant communication between the vehicles, and less lag time and less dark spots or dark areas in the rural spots from lack of cellular. So it's also a big deal for tourism, for the areas that have a high tourism population, because that's like passenger vehicles are coming sooner than the freight vehicles even.
There was one question for Lonnie. How many households in Deep East Texas again?
You know, I should know that right off the top of my head, and I apologize for not knowing a number, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 160,000 households, give or take, maybe a little less than that.
And then a question for all of you. Have you looked at high-speed internet as a TDM strategy?
Well, we're looking at it as everything to us. I mean, 6 of our 12 counties have declined in population over the last 10 years. And so it's survival for our region. The only counties we have that have had any modest growth are the ones along that US 59 corridor. All of our other counties that don't have the big highway coming through them are declining in population, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, you think where we were 80 years ago without electricity in rural America, that's where we're going to be before you know it without broadband in rural America. There's no one going to be willing to build a home or buy a home or relocate a business, certainly, into any area where they can't have quality, high-speed, affordable internet.
And people aren't going to grow their businesses here. They're going to go someplace else and take advantage of access to connectivity to grow and build a business. So there's not going to be less entrepreneurial options as well. So we're definitely concerned about that. Here we have a really high service sector employment because we're a high tourism area, and that's been hit very hard by COVID. So we're trying to figure out how to utilize access to broadband to then help them get jobs, since we've seen a huge increase of remote work and remote work opportunities through some of our other research. 47% over year to year this year from last on remote work opportunities, just so everybody knows. So it's like, how do we get our folks here who might be under or unemployed access to those jobs so they don't have to leave the region, so we can keep families here, things like that. Because once we start seeing that decline of population like Lonnie has, you start seeing underfunded schools, like it just has this negative erosion effect. So how do we keep people locally?
I had a high school civics teacher who she was always talking about World War I and how her favorite term was vicious cycle. All these things started happening and it created a vicious cycle. And the next thing you know, the whole world was at war. I see broadband as an opportunity for rural America to create a virtuous cycle where one positive thing leads to another. More jobs, better paying jobs, better health outcomes, better educational outcomes, more opportunities, more of our young people wanting to stay here. I think a lot of them want to stay here anyway, but there's just not the opportunity for them. So I don't think we can say enough about how broadband is now a basic building block that it's not like it's going to solve all our problems. We're still going to have problems when we get broadband in, but it's just one of the basic tools in the toolbox that we will be able to use to help start addressing those problems.
Yeah. Do you want me to take I can answer the broadband planning groups question. Yeah. So when we did that, we had, it's a subcommittee of the COG itself. So Southwest Colorado is a little different. Our EDD is separate from the COG because we're special out here. So but we did involve our EDD and some of our chambers who were interested. So we had some of the business advocacy, we had some of the elected officials, we had some of our ISPs as well to talk about our broadband needs. So we kind of have this very large committee of broadband, and it has morphed and changed over the years. We also have a local technology planning team, and that's typically the IT and ISPs that work together to talk in more of the gory detail and technology language. So they can talk to each other and don't have to worry about the mayor or the commissioners being confused by all the technology end of things. And that kind of changing the process a little bit, so that can inform our technology, our broadband team. But it changes and it morphs over time. What we did before isn't going to be needed because we're not in the planning process. We're in the how do we, like if one of our tribes gets funding and then one of our county gets funding, how do we ensure that those all play together state, not so much planning as to where we need to put the thing. So that's what we did. We also we're our TPO, and what we've done is worked with our DOT. We have some folks at the state level who are involved with broadband at the DOT. So we work directly with them since our TPO is not as involved, but we do help inform the RTPO as to what we're doing.
Misty, you guys have a pretty interesting group in Southeast Ohio as well, don't you?
I think we are the de facto leader of the conversation because there was no one else having the conversation, and our local governments, our members were looking at us and saying they were getting the question, or they were getting, citizens saying we don't have access to broadband before the pandemic, right? It wasn't, now the pandemic has just highlighted all of that lack of access, but before the pandemic it was, what is Buckeye Hills doing to help us, to help get broadband in our region? And we were like, that's not, it's not a public utility. It's a private concern. And so what can we be doing other than trying to educate about it and the lack of access? And I guess we were born the leader out of that frustration that the FCC was saying we had service, and we lived there. We knew we didn't have service. So I think it just became, we started the work. Now we've put together a broadband committee that is made up of elected officials and private citizens and folks like that, government relations firms. There are so many groups now engaged in the conversation, working at the Appalachian Local Development District, Regional Council, service level, and then expanding that to a statewide conversation using all regional councils. I guess at the heart of everything that we do and every conversation we have is putting communities and people before profit. And so our focus has really been on supporting local government and communities to get broadband access where it isn't. And those conversations, really, we're open to anyone coming in that wants to be supportive of the message. And I think the pandemic's really, it's a bad thing, but it's really going to help solidify the conversation. So.
Yeah. me and Macy were discussing that earlier about, you know, I don't want to call it a blessing or anything like that in disguise, but it certainly has brought a lot of light to the issues that we have with broadband, not only in rural areas, but as far as access and, you know, inequity in urban areas.
I think one of the things that we're trying to get our elected officials to understand is it's a true problem and it's going to cost a lot of money to solve. And so we've got to get started, right? I mean, it's not going to go away, and the problem would be solved right now if it was profitable for private business to solve it. So it is now time for communities, local government, regional councils, those organizations to step in and help solve the digital divide for those areas where it's just not ever going to be profitable for a private business to do that. Now, I don't necessarily, as a regional council, want to start up an internet service, be an internet service provider. I don't need that. But help me help you, internet service provider, right? That's kind of where I'm trying to figure out, like, what can I be saying? What should I be messaging that's going to put resources in your hands that enable you to deploy into those hard to reach areas in my region? And, you know, barring getting them to deploy it, if I have to form an ISP, I guess I will, but I don't want to.
Yeah, we're in the same boat.
Yeah, we are definitely, from the start, our goal has never been for DebtCog to get into the internet business. However, our goal has just been to try to make it happen, but we are so committed to this idea that we cannot allow anyone to come in here and cherry pick the areas of our region. And so if you're not careful dealing with the local, even if you provide additional subsidies, they will just continue to cherry pick, and they'll pick a few more cherries, but there'll still just be lots of areas that don't have anything. As it turns out, we are an eligible applicant for this CDBG money we're applying for. So, and private corporations are not. So if we happen to get this funding that we're asking for, we will have to own the assets, but I guarantee you we'll be looking, we'll have an RFP out on the streets, you know, first thing Monday morning after we get awarded the grant, to find a provider that knows what they're doing and has experience to come in here and manage this thing for us and run it for us, even though we will own the assets.
Yeah, that's what we want to do too, is just get the infrastructure in the ground to let the private companies serve the communities, or if a municipality or county wants to be an ISP, then they can do that too. But I don't want to have to get phone calls at 3 a.m. when someone swerved to hit a deer and hit the pole instead, and so we're responsible for locates. So it's like getting a company to do the management and the administration of it is important. What we have discovered is in doing this, that it's actually better maybe to have two companies, one that is just the infrastructure management company, and another that is that has no actual, that is not involved in leasing or providing services. They just do the infrastructure management, because what we found is that when a company is selected to do the infrastructure management and they're also a provider across the infrastructure, they tend not to play fair with the other providers. So having that third party that they're not a provider has helped make it a bit more equitable for the other ISPs.
I'm making a note of that. By the way, I want to give kudos to Miriam, because we were at a conference probably 4 years ago, and she was speaking about what they were already doing in Southwest Colorado. And, you know, we had certainly been talking about the need for better broadband in our region, but prior to hearing Miriam talk about some of the efforts they had already made, I had never really connected the dots in my brain. And I came back from that and I started asking, well, what are we doing and what can we do and what should we do? And so Miriam, you really, I might have gotten there on my own, but you helped me get there a lot quicker as far as the need to come back and try to make something, be a spark plug to make something happen.
Oh, thank you, Lonnie. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that that you're able to move along forward because you've got a little bit more support. Thanks. That's nice.
This is Mike Eastland in Dallas-Fort Worth area. I can't remember if it was Misty or Miriam, but one of you mentioned the rural electric cooperatives.
Mm.
And I was just wondering to what level do they have an interest? Are they a partner? Do you see them as a way to use their network of assets and infrastructure to further this? And a willingness to do so?
I can speak to that a little bit. We have several rural electric cooperatives. We only have a couple telephone cooperatives, so I think it's much easier for a telephone cooperative to transition into the broadband space. You know, being an electricity provider and being a broadband provider, the service level is very different in customer service. But I think there has been a general hesitancy, at least in the state of Ohio, for electrical co-ops to enter this space. I also see a shifting of the tides there, and I am hopeful that several of our rural electric cooperatives bid in the RDOF. You know, they're in the silent period, so they can't talk about it even if they are. So we don't know until the final outcome of that auction is announced. But one of our rural electric cooperatives in the state received a planning grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission and then applied for an implementation grant to build middle mile. Another one received a planning grant to actually look at the feasibility of becoming a broadband service provider and studied that. And I am hopeful they're in the RDOF right now. So I think the conversation around, I mean, they have the assets, they own the poles, you know, they can control the make ready, the improvement to their poles improves their asset, their plant. So it makes sense for them to do that. I'm hopeful for that in the RDOF. I'm hopeful that we see several of those rural electric co-ops that have stepped forward and said, I want to do this. And then that will hopefully make it easier for others to join in the future. But, you know, the RDOF is once every 10 years. So we've got to figure out something else in the interim. But
Mike, we have 4 electric co-ops in our region. None of them want to be, now they may change their mind as we move forward, but none of them want to be in the internet business, but all 4 of them have been most cooperative with us. We signed non-disclosure agreements with them as part of our network design, and they opened their records and they shared all their data. And this 600 plus miles of fiber that we're talking about, most of it would go on co-op poles and rights of way. So our co-ops here, I know in other parts of the country, co-ops are maybe more interested in actually going into the business. Ours are just interested in getting the service for their benefit and for the benefit of their customers. So we couldn't be more happy with the cooperation they've given us. And we're glad to be partners with them because it doesn't make sense. They're already serving every one of these homes that we are trying to get to. And it only makes sense that there has to be some role for them to play, either actively delivering service or at least helping us get the service delivered.
In Southwest Colorado, it's been a little weird with our co-ops. So because we have the 2 tribes and our electric co-ops, we have 3 electric utility co-ops in our 5 counties. It gets a little strange for land. So utilizing infrastructure, tribal land to serve areas, you can get a little dicey because you have to go with federal laws versus state laws. And one thing that we have run into is that the electric utility easements in a lot of these areas are so old, they're for electric utility only, which means that if an electric utility hangs fiber on their poles to serve their plants, then that is for public use, that's their use, so that's part of electric utility easement. If they allow for that fiber to have commercial data,
Speaking of broadband.
Yeah.
We've lost Miriam.
Yes.
All right. Well, we've hit our time anyway. But if she comes back, I assume she can finish. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially thank Lonnie, Misty, and Miriam, even though she's not here, for joining us and just discussing broadband in your region.
Speaking of broadband, my internet just went down. So maybe you know anybody that can do that? Do anything about this?
The FCC.
You have put an exclamation point behind the conversation.
So what's happened with our co-ops is the electric utility easement issue is they have to go back through and perfect that easement to allow for commercial use of those lines, and that's expensive and time consuming and doesn't always work out. Because you get a landowner that wants $1 million or some ridiculous type of thing. So Colorado passed a law that Indiana, Arkansas, does Ohio have that, Misty, that allows for, you don't have to perfect that easement for existing fiber.
That's one of our messages.
Yeah, and the Colorado law even went as far as to say, to hang new fiber on the electric utility poles, you don't have to perfect that easement. It actually has not been utilized particularly well in the state because the co-ops that were interested in doing that have already just done it. We're bounded on 2 of our sides by 2 co-ops that have already done that, one of which has fiber to the home in a community of like 600 people in the middle of the mountains. Like it's an old mining town. And they just already have that because their constituents said they wanted it. In Southwest, I have one co-op that is basically MIA. I mean, they're the epitome of old school in that. And then I have one that has a subsidiary ISP. So they don't know what to do with that, with the ISP that they own, but yet they have to still play nice with the other ISPs, and how do you, yeah, it gets kind of old in there. So it's kind of a crapshoot depending upon the ISP. I think that's the summary there. Or depending upon the co-op of what they want to do and how willingness they are to engage. Most of them have decided that there's some benefit in there, but how they engage has been kind of a mess in some places.
I would have one last request, and maybe this can be funneled through NARC, and that is to get a list of the names of the consultants that people are using that they think have done a really good job for them. That would be very helpful, I think, for a lot of us to have that knowledge.
Yeah, we can certainly get that together. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to send them my way and I can funnel them to the right person. But again, thank you everyone for joining. And I think we are going to end things now. So have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you all.
So much. This is great. Thanks for the questions.